Hey Flock, Mike here from Epic Duck Studios, and welcome to the Epic Hobby. Today I'm going to be painting Purple Demon Skin. The model I'm using here today is Keratos, the Single Horn of Doom, from Shattered Hell by Crippled God Foundry. He's basically a big, naked rhinoceros demon, and is really perfect for just exploring different skin tones, and because he's a demon, we can do some really interesting things. Now I'm going to get the basic tones down with a lot of dry brushing, and to do that I'm going to be using some cheap cosmetic brushes. These ones are specifically from Elf Cosmetics. They're available at Walmart, Target, and a bunch of other stores. I'm going to be using the concealer brush for small, tight areas, and either the blending eye brush or the eye crease brush for the larger areas. My other secret weapon when I'm doing any kind of dry brushing is just plain old cardboard. And the reason I like to use cardboard is it's got a bit of a rough texture and it's very, very desiccant. It's really good at absorbing moisture. And that helps us get the dry brush just really, really dry. We just pull all that pigment out and just get going. Now I'm going to begin here with a base coat of Bad Bruise from P3. This is a slightly bluish deep purple. And you can see I'm actually using one of my dry brushes to put this on, but I'm not really dry brushing. The brush is saturated, I'm not drying it off. I'm just slapping this on and smoothing it out. It's a very quick way to get down base coats. And what I'll do is, if there's any little areas I can't reach, like under the armpits and stuff, I'll switch to a smaller brush. That's when I'll bust out the concealer brush and just kind of work into those tighter areas. You can see the size of this brush gives you a lot of coverage very, very quickly and evenly. It's just a really effective tool for building up a single solid color. Now, of course, you could use an airbrush for this if you had one handy, and certainly I would normally use an airbrush, but I wanted to go through the whole process here of just building this up with nothing but regular painting techniques. Something you can do anywhere without access to extra filtration and all the things that come with airbrushing. So I'm going to go off the rails a little bit here, and I'm actually going to do a layer of Retributor armor over the purple. And because this is a demon, because it's sort of a non-normal entity, I wanted to give the skin tones a sort of a weird ethereal feel. And that's why I'm working a little bit of a metallic into it. And I'm going to build some color up on top of this. So you're going to see it very, very pronouncedly metallic for a little while, and it's going to slowly fade away until it's just a tiny hint of a shimmer underneath all the skin. So you can see I'm really blotting away as much of this color as possible, and I'm just testing it on the crease on the back of my thumb. And I find that's a really good place to just check to make sure that I'm getting the right amount of paint when I'm dry brushing. Now I'm going to apply this to the whole model. I'm going to let it catch all those different muscle surfaces and just leave the creases that deep, bruisey purple. And what you're going to see is this actually does a really good job of complementing the purple and giving us sort of a oily bodybuilder kind of look to the model. And it's really interesting, and honestly you probably could actually work with it as a base coat all on its own. But I'm going to take it just a little bit further than that. Now because Keratos has these really large manacles on his wrist, it actually makes the hands a little bit harder to dry brush because you sort of get this little void area around the bracer or the manacle where the dry brush doesn't really work in. And we can just touch those areas up later. It's not important that they get perfect right now. Really, the dry brushing is just a whole lot of guiding layers. So we've got our nice bronzed base coat on top of the deep purple now, and I want to start adding some lighter purples and some lighter flesh tones on top of that. So I'm going to be using Xeris Purple from Citadel. You can see, compared to P3's Bad Bruise, is much more of a true purple. Bad Bruise is almost just a dark blue by comparison. And one more time before I start dry brushing the model, I'm just checking it on the crease on the back of my thumb knuckle, just making sure a little bit of color gets deposited, but not a heavy amount. We don't want to look like we're painting, we just want to leave that little hit of color. That's really what dry brushing is about. Now, after dry brushing the model for a couple seconds, I realized there just really wasn't quite enough paint on the brush, so I'm going to go ahead and load it back up again, and not quite pull as much of the color out of the brush. I'm leaving a little bit more behind, so that when I go hit the model, it covers the gold just a little bit more effectively. So I'm just going to work my way around the model and applying the Xeris Purple over everywhere we've just applied the Retributor Gold. And the idea is just to start tinting that gold back to the purple so it looks a little more like the base coat does. It just brings all the colors together. So now we've gone from sort of an oiled bronze look to more of a iridescent purple, and we're just going to keep building on that legacy now. I'm going to take some murderous magenta, add that to my palette. You can see it's actually quite pink compared to the purple of Xeris Purple or the near blue of Bad Brews. So we're kind of working through some very different colors in a linear progression. Minus the gold in the middle, it's kind of the oddball. But again, we're just getting our dry brush ready here, blotting most of the color out, and just applying that over all the same areas. So what you'll see as we start to build more of these layers up is that we're really knocking that gold back to the point where it's just going to be a very subtle kind of iridescence coming from underneath the skin. And we're getting just more, I don't want to use the word warm because that's not quite right, but more of like a living tissue kind of feel as each color adds on. So now we've built a couple layers up over the Retributor Gold, and it's starting to feel a lot less metallic and a lot more like it's just kind of got a shimmery iridescence to it. Now I'm going to take some Cadian Flesh Tone from Citadel, and we're going to use this to start building up some more lifelike skin tone, and especially in the focal points. So it's going to be around the face and around the hands, where I really want to kind of draw some attention on this character. Now you can see as I'm swirling the brush out to get it prepared for dry brushing that a little bit of the magenta starts to come through. You can see the skin tone kind of subtly changing. And I'm just going to roll with it. I don't mind if there's a little bit of magenta left in the skin tone because it's going to help tie it back to our previous layer. Now one thing I've done basically every time I've started dry brushing, and actually I haven't really commented on, is the fact that I always start on the right thigh. And the reason I'm doing that is with the pose of the model, it's kind of a little bit of an out-of-the-way detail. It's not a super important focal point, but it's got a lot of crease and like shape to it. And that helps me test that the dry brush is working properly and depositing the right amount of color before I commit to doing the whole model with that dry brush. So now we're getting out of the weird shimmery purple phase and into the big naked rhino guy phase, which is different but not necessarily better. What we're going to do now is use a purple glaze to tie this all together to kind of bring all of our disparate tones kind of under control and unite them. So for this I'm going to be using P3's Piggy Purple ink, and I'm going to be mixing that with contrast medium. Now you'll probably notice my contrast medium looks a little bit discolored. I accidentally dunked a brush load of Skeleton Horde into it at one point, and it caused it of course to pick up a little bit of that color. It's not enough to really throw off any general usage, but just be aware that's what happened, and it's not that my contrast medium's gone bad or I've replaced it with some magical other product. So now Piggy Purple ink is a very, very vibrant ink, so I'm working in a lot of contrast medium here because I want this very thin. I'm going to glaze the whole model with it, and I don't want it to just murder all the work I've already done, right? I just want it to complement the colors and bind them together, as opposed to just flat out replacing them. And I'm doing a quick test here on the bottom of Keratos' feet. And the reason for that is there's an area I'm probably going to want to repaint later anyway, give them a different color than the rest of the model. And it's a good out-of-the-way detail. I can just test the color on first, make sure I didn't load up too much or the ink's not too heavy, etc. Now I'm happy with it, so I'm going to apply it evenly and quickly to the whole model. And that is the trick with contrast paint, whether it's the true contrast paints or something you've made with contrast medium. It's important that you apply it in a big single wet coat as fast as you possibly can. That's what gives you the best results with contrast paint. If you let any part of it dry while you're working adjacent to it with wet paint, that's where you get those weird little tide marks and other details that just look like it's incomplete and kind of haphazard. So you'll see what I'm doing is I'm applying this in fairly thick liberal coats and then using my brush to smooth it out onto a surface. And what that's doing is it's tinting all the surfaces, but pulling it a little bit away from the creases so we don't get super impactful shadows, because this model already has pretty good shading happening. And really I want this color more just to tie all my colors together to kind of unify them. So the Piggy Purple ink wash has got us away from that sort of big naked monster feel, and you know, it's much more of a cohesive purple now. I need to really let this dry, so what I'm going to do is just work on some of the other details in the meantime. I'm going to start with a little bit of Xandri dust and just use this on the toenails, the fingernails, the teeth, and probably his horn as well. Now, all these extra little details aren't really part of this tutorial, so I'm going to kind of skip through them, but if there's any important points, I'll talk about them. So I'm just adding a little bit of shading to the back of each toenail using some Battlefield Brown just to darken it up a little bit, and then using a mix of Xandri dust and Battlefield Brown just to mix the two together. From there, I'm pulling out a little bit of Morghast Bone as a top highlight on the toenail. Now, when I'm base coating the horn here with Xandri dust, I'm leaving about 20% at the bottom untouched, and that's so that I can do some transitions there, working the bone into the purple. And I'll be using Battlefield Brown and just assorted mixes with it to get that done. As with the toes, I want to add a little bit of an edge highlight to the front of the horn. Now, the detail's a little bit soft. This horn's actually a little bit rounded, and I want it to feel sharper and crisper. So what I'm doing is I'm purposely just keeping that line very tight. To make that edge look even crisper, I'm going to bring in a little bit more of a highlight. I'm using some Sickly Skin from P3. Jumping back to Xandri dust, I'm going to use that as a base coat for all the teeth in the mouth. Now, I decided to give Caritas yellow eyes because I feel it's a really strong counter to all the purple skin going on. So I'm going to begin by base coating with P3 Hearthfire. We'll then add some black pupils in, and then just do a little bit to build the yellow up into a more interesting tone. Now, if you slip up a little bit in this step, you can easily correct any areas that end up yellow that shouldn't be by just bringing in some of the deep purples again to cover that up. I'm still going to be adding some highlights to the skin in a moment as well, so there'll be an opportunity to fix any really tiny blemishes when I'm bringing those highlight colors in. For the pupil, I'm going to be using Citadel's Corvus Black. This is one of my favorite blacks to work with because it's actually a very dark gray and leaves you just a little bit of room to add some true black in if you need to. For the pupils, I'm basically just painting the front half of each eye towards the front of the head, just completely black. So I actually didn't have to paint as much with Hearthfire as I did, but here we are. Now, to seal the deal, I'm adding a tiny dot of white at the top of the pupil, right where it meets the yellow of the bulk of the eye. This is the most nerve-wracking part of this paint job, is this tiny little dot on each eye, keeping them roughly in the same position, same size. One benefit we have with this model is that you can't really see both eyes at the same time, so if they don't exactly point in the same direction, you're not really going to notice. Finally, I'm going to take a little bit of a bright orange, in this case Troll Slayer orange, and just add a little bit of an underline to the eye, specifically on the yellow part of it. And it just helps create the idea of a little bit of more shape and volume to the eyeball. Alright, I'm going to bring a base coat of Xandri dust onto the fingernails. This is going to be the exact same process I use for the toenails, so I'm going to go ahead and just skip to where it's done. Now, our friend Caritas here has a little shaggy loincloth thing going on. He doesn't trim the garden very well. We're going to go ahead and base coat that with some Doombull Brown, and then mix in a little bit of Xandri dust into Doombull to create some highlight colors. And now, I can never again honestly say that I'm a man who hasn't had to detail a rhino demon's hairy butt. That's just forbidden knowledge I'm going to have to live with now. And you watched it, so I guess you're not doing much better. For the bracers on Caritas' wrists, I'm going to use Warplock Bronze as the base and build up some brighter colors from there. So next I'm going to be using Balthazar Gold, and I'm only going to use this on the outer trim, the outer sort of segment of those manacles, leaving the inner part to be the darker color, the bronze color. To help age the bronze here, I'm going to add a little bit of Nihilakh Oxide to them, basically just the crease between that outer ring and the bigger middle section, and there's some little grooves and dents within it that I'm just going to try and pick out as well. So now it's time to do the final detailing on the skin, and here I've gone back to the Cadian Flesh Tone, which, if you remember, was the top color we dry brushed before applying the piggy purple ink wash. And now I'm using that to really pick out the sharp crease details. So right now I'm working on the knuckles on the hand. I'm also going to bring this color entirely into the palm of the hand and the palm of the foot. And the reason for that is that people with darker complexions tend to have lighter palms and lighter soles of their feet. And while we honestly don't need to use real life people as a cue for a big purple monster, it helps ground your model in reality a little bit by having some subtle cues that kind of tie it back to real life experience. So with the palms of the hands and feet done, I want to start adding just extra definition to certain muscle groups in different areas of the model. So I'm picking out the edges of the toes and that sort of crest along the top of the toe, and then working towards the back and really bringing out the musculature across the back and the shoulders, and then areas like the hands, the knuckles, and the face. Anything that's really a prominent detail and you want to kind of draw focus to. And what I'm trying to do is do more of that towards the top of the model, because it makes the model feel sort of taller and more full. If you've got a gradient of, darker details towards the bottom and brighter details towards the top. So I'm just using Cadian Flesh for this, which is the color that was very dominant on the model just prior to that picky purple ink wash. And so I can basically bring this back out and use it now to highlight all these different muscle areas. And they've already got some amount of this color built into them, so it really just makes that edge just stand out just a little bit more, but I don't have to worry about it not tying into the colors that are present. Now highlighting the face is probably the most important part, and I'm making sure that all the different little bits of definition are really focused on. So I'm coming along the chin, the top of the bottom lip, and then, areas around the eye, around the back of the jawline, and just really kind of pulling all those details forward by making them just a little bit brighter than every other part of the model. And this is also a good opportunity to start feathering or blending the skin into the horn, because this Cadian flesh tone is going to sit pretty nicely with the different bone colors we've used to complete the horn, because they're very tonally similar. It's got a little more pink to it as opposed to like the tan or the light yellowish color of some of the bone stuff, but they have the same kind of level of brightness and saturation, and so they do pull together pretty nicely with not a lot of effort. So at this point, the process is really just repetition, building up these same highlights until I'm really happy with how far they go. Mixing in maybe just a little bit of the bone color because it's a little less stark than just adding straight white in, and using that as just a very final highlight on some of the key points, mostly around the head, the forehead, around the eyes, the mouth, and the jawline. That's really about it. Now, one of the last places I wanted to add a highlight was also to the knees and the elbows, and that's just to give the impression of some wear and a little bit of dryness to them. And that's just a really common feature a lot of humans have is, their knees and their elbows, because of just the wear and tear on those joints, just don't look as fresh as the rest of your skin. So just by making it a little bit brighter, giving it, a little bit of just a highlight is really enough to make it just stand out as a worn element of the skin here. Alright, that wraps up this purple skin tutorial featuring Caritas, the Single Horn of Doom from Shattered Hell by Crippled God Foundry. I want to thank them for the opportunity to paint this model before their Kickstarter finished. If you're interested in either a digital file for this miniature or a physical resin copy, you can learn more in the show notes below. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, do something epic.
Hey, thanks for watching my video. If you enjoyed that one, please hit like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell so you get notifications when I post new videos in the future. If you want to take your support even further, you can do that at patreon.com/epicduck. Every little bit helps keep the lights on and the paint flowing, puts new models on the table so I can make interesting videos, and most importantly, puts a roof over my family's head and food on the table. You can also join me for live painting shows several times a week at twitch.tv/epicduckstudios. I'd love if you came by and watched the show sometime and followed the channel. I want to give a big thank you to everyone who's supported my content over the years, both past and present. It's been an absolutely wild ride, and I couldn't do this without all the wonderful fans and flockers out there. The hobby community is just an amazing group of people, and you really make this worth doing. So let's just keep on doing this together, making more content, and just being fantastic together for years to come. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, do something epic.